This is at least one of the ones we've been all waiting for during the off season. It's Penn State in Columbus to take on the Buckeyes. We will talk Ohio State football here as we do each and every week. Get the voice of college football with these two and Kevin Noon waiting in the wings. Steve Hellwagon, Bucknuts 247 Sports, Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Scoop. Gentlemen, how are we doing today?
Doing well.
Great.
Good.
Doing good.
All right, before we start to break down Penn State football, the matchups, and what's been coming out of James Franklin's mouth, erroneous or otherwise, let's look back at Indiana real quick. That was certainly a team that the previous game went out and gave Michigan State all sorts of problems. So I don't want to minimize the effort against IU because they've gone through the gauntlet. Yeah, they're only 2-5, but 5 losses against top 10 teams, or what in Penn State's case was a top 10 team, and they've mostly been in the game. But Tony, 44 points in the first half, that was just a beatdown and a name your score kind of game.
Yeah, and once Jack Tuttle went down, Indiana had no chance of an offense. They were never going to win the game, but they couldn't move it without Tuttle's ability to throw the ball. They didn't have anybody else that could threaten to throw, so that just shrunk the field even more for Indiana, and Ohio State's defense took over from there. And the Ohio State offense at this point, I can't wait to see what Penn State can do because nobody else has given them anything yet. And this is Ryan Day scoring 44 points in the first half, calling off the dogs, and having to do that consistently. And Travion Henderson is the most underutilized, best player in America right now because you don't want to risk getting him hurt because they haven't needed him in the third quarter or even the fourth quarter. I think I looked a week or so ago and he had maybe 6 carries in the fourth quarter this year to give you an idea of how much they haven't been needing him that late. And this game was no different. And it was, the Indiana defense having some injured corners and stuff that didn't help, but Ohio State could have done whatever they wanted. And it is interesting to me to watch them throw the ball in the fourth quarter with their backups, which I like, and it gets those guys experience rather than just running the clock out and getting nothing out of these blowouts. So at least Ryan Day is trying to get something out of it for everybody.
Yeah.
Steve, your thoughts on IU?
Yeah, I thought it was another solid performance, both sides of the ball, following up and really taking what they did against Rutgers and Maryland, I feel, to another level on both sides of the ball. I think through the end of the first half, Ohio State had, I think, 19 consecutive possessions with C.J. Stroud as the quarterback, going back to the Rutgers game and deducting out end of the half kneel downs where they weren't trying to score, where they had come away with some type of points, whatever it may have been, touchdown, field goal, whatever. And they hadn't punted since the Rutgers game, which was 3 weeks earlier, although 2 games ago. So, yeah, I'd say it was a command performance. The defense gave up a touchdown on the first drive. Indiana moved it right down the field. And unfortunately for Indiana, as Tony said, their hope for the game kind of went by the wayside when Jack Tuttle went down with the injury. He led the team straight down the field to start the game, and Haskell Garrett popped him on his touchdown throw and knocked him out of the game for a little bit. And now I guess he's not even going to play this coming week. He did come back and play a little bit against Ohio State, but will not play, I guess, this coming week, whoever they're lining up against this week. I've lost track of that. But at any rate, their season is kind of going by the wayside. Unfortunate, as you said, 2-5 with 5 losses to teams that, at least as of last week, were in the top 10 or 11 nationally. And, what can you say? I mean, they've just had a rough way to go. They needed Michael Penix to be healthy to compete with everybody this year and to give everybody a fair shot, and that hasn't happened. And so they're probably looking at a 3-9 season or whatever at this point. Not going to make a bowl game, it does not appear. So just a tough way to go for them. But Ohio State took care of their business. They did not take a step backward coming out of the open week, which I think was something everybody wanted to see. C.J. Stroud continues to play outstanding football, made several more outstanding throws. Another one down the middle to Jackson Smith-Njigba for about 30 yards. A back shoulder throw to Garrett Wilson. That was pretty good, and has great vision, dumps it off to Henderson for, I think that was a design screen, though, for him down about the 15-yard line to dump it off in the left flat. He had blockers out in front of him, and it was a big old convoy running on through the night there in Bloomington. So, yeah, it was a command performance all the way across the board. Henderson, 3 more touchdowns, 2 rushing, that 1 receiving, give him 14 now for his freshman year. He is 4 shy of Maurice Claret's Ohio State freshman record of 18 touchdowns, and they've only played 7 games. So he's averaging 2 a game right now, and he has scored a touchdown in every game. And it's just been, what can you say? To me, I think you got to like the fact that the defense is starting to come together, or really has come together, I guess. And they've really identified who can make plays, and the guys up front are starting to make some game-changing plays as well, where that wasn't there in the first 3 or 4 games.
Yeah, making plays to the tune of 14 tackles for loss against Indiana, 7 points, all on the first drive, and then that was it. Kevin Noon, Buckeye Scoop, everyone. And Kevin would be the guy that was the most adamant that this was not going to be a football game. It was just going to be 1 half and done, as it was. Again, 44 points in the first half, Kevin.
It's difficult being right as much as I am. It's
hard to be humble, isn't it?
It really is hard to be humble.
What it's like.
But, we go into the game. Indiana can't run the ball. Check. Indiana can't throw the ball. Check. Indiana can't defend. Check. I mean, about the only thing I was wrong on was the weather forecast. So I'll take my victory lap. But, Ohio State came out and did what it needed to do. CJ Stroud was sharp. I mean, I was sitting next to Tony in the press box, and the first couple of touchdowns were rushing touchdowns. I'm like, well, he's not going to hit his 5 number at that point. They didn't keep up their pick 6 streak, but, he looked good. The running game did what it needed to do, even though they were down Master Teague, and Mayan Williams left the game with a little bit of discomfort, as we saw on the television broadcast, but they were able to accomplish what they needed to. We didn't come out of that game necessarily seeing any major departures, and they're able to focus now on Penn State. So it was the type of game I expected, more or less. Again, it just was, just another game on the schedule.
We will now focus on the Super Chat question coming in from Ryan. Thank you so much for the contribution. We appreciate that. So Ryan, Steve, is looking for an offensive player, defensive player who's going to break out and have a big game against Penn State.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, you've got about 6 or 7 different guys on offense that you could look at. Stroud is obviously a candidate. He could throw for 300. I mean, you look at Penn State's defense, and they are in the top 5 or 10, I think, in scoring defense, 14.6 points per game allowed. And nobody has scored more than 23 points a game, I believe, in a game against them. I think Iowa had 23. And so points could be at a premium, although, is anybody going to slow down this Ohio State offense? I'm not sure. Should be a good test. If you put me, out there to say, who do you think it would be? Penn State has a good corner. I think Castro Fields, I believe is his name, a really good corner, a good safety, Jaquan Brisker, who's made some great plays for them on defense. Do they try and isolate Chris Olave and take him away? Does that leave Garrett Wilson or Jackson Smith-Njigba to go for triple digits? I don't know, but one of those 2 guys would be my pick. I'll say Garrett Wilson, just because he could pop off a 7 for 120 and 2 touchdowns at any given moment. So I think they try and take Olave away with Fields, and then that leaves Joey Porter Jr. maybe to try and catch up with Wilson. And he's a good player, but I think Wilson's better. I'm not sure that Ohio State's going to worry too much about, trying to get Travion Henderson 200 yards or anything stupid like that in this game. So, Stroud is obviously a pick, but I'll say Garrett Wilson. Over on defense, Ronnie Hickman, to me, has been a guy who's just kind of been the Swiss Army knife all season long. played linebacker, played safety, goes and does whatever they need. And he just strikes me as kind of the utility guy that could maybe get a pick six. He's already had one this year. If the front's able to get some pressure on Clifford and make him throw a bad pick, maybe Ronnie Hickman is the beneficiary of that. But otherwise, he'll probably have his usual 8 or 10 tackles and be around the ball quite a bit. I think we remember the Maryland game, the first drive, he had 4 tackles on the drive, the first drive that Maryland had. So he always comes out of the box ready to go hit and make plays. And I think that'll be important for this game. So I picked 2 pretty obvious ones, I think, probably the two of the top 4 or 5 guys on the team overall, but those would probably be my picks.
I'm going to go with Illinois and Ohio State are very similar to me. They're very similar offenses. Illinois was I see you looking up there, Mark. Illinois ran for 357 yards last week, so I'm going to go with Travion Henderson. I think if they need him to play all 4 quarters, I think he's going to have a big game. I don't know that they will need him for all 4 quarters, but Penn State losing a defensive tackle, PJ Mustafar, is not good for them, not good for their run defense. And so that will help Ohio State run the ball. The fact that Ohio State can throw it is always going to create issues with the run defense, because eventually you're going to have to back off a little bit and try to tackle Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave on these 9-yard, 10-yard hitches. So I'm thinking you give Travion Henderson 20 carries, he's going to have a big game and do something with it. It's just they've only had the need like once to give him the ball that often. And so, and I've said this on my Buckeye Weekly podcast before, it's almost for Travion Henderson to have a big game, he has to kind of get shut down in the first half a little bit. That way there's reason to play in the second half. And if he's getting 9 yards of carry in the first half, things are going so well that he's probably not going to play in the second half. So he almost has to sandbag a little in this game, maybe take a couple of knees, something like that when he gets out in the open. Don't want to score too early, but I think he could have a big game. Defensively, I don't know if it's going to be a big game, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what Denzel Burke does against Jahan Dotson, against the John Parker Washington, and unless I'm confusing him with an old USC quarterback.
And there's like that Lambert, the guy with a hyphenated name, Lambert something or other.
So I think there's an opportunity for – I go back to last year, Jahan Dotson against Sean Wade. I really want to see Jahan Dotson against Denzel Burke and see how he performs in this matchup against the best receiver he will have seen to this point. Now, he's a different player than he was to start the season, Denzel Burke. He's seen a lot. He's had some ups and downs against Maryland, bounced back well, and I want to see what it looks like against an NFL receiver, and I think we'll see that however many times he's matched up with Jahan Dotson. So I'll go those 2 guys, Travion Henderson, Denzel Burke as my 2.
I'm going to jump in on something about Penn State's scoring defense first and point out what a bunch of tomato cans Penn State has played so far. In terms of scoring offense, the most potent scoring offense they've faced is Auburn, 34.6 points per game, good for 24th. Ohio State scoring 49 and change, so pretty significant. Teams in the 100s that Penn State has faced: Wisconsin at 110, Indiana at 114, and Illinois at 120. So, it's like Ohio State has had this success down these last couple of games and have gone against some pretty bad pass defense type of teams. But I'm going to be quick to point out that Penn State, I think some of their numbers are a result of playing teams that are playing offensive football from a couple of centuries ago. So, a serious issue there. As to the question that was in the super chat, offensively, I think the 2 obvious ones have been taken, with Steve taking CJ Stroud and Tony taking Travion Henderson. So am I allowed to have the field? Because you guys really have taken the 2 obvious ones there. I'm gonna say Jackson Smith and Jigba. I'm gonna say that just from his position, I don't think that I think that Penn State's strength is in the back 7, but I think their strength really is their corners, and I like their safeties too, but I just seem to think that JSN is going to be able to find the little cracks and crevices out there, and he's going to be a volume receiver, and he's going to break a couple of plays. So I'm going to say JSN on offense. On defense, I don't know. I think that it's a case of where I'm going to take somebody on the defensive line. I was going to take Denzel Burke because I think that an ineffective Sean Clifford is going to make Jahan Dotson look pretty average in this game because nobody's going to be able to deliver the ball there. But as I was going through and studying for Tale of the Tape that runs tomorrow on Buckeye Scoop, that Penn State offensive line is pretty mediocre. And I think that somebody like, I don't know, let's say Tyreek Smith. Let's say Tyreek Smith comes in and just blows them up. I think that this could be a big week for him. I think that somebody who gets out there and sees 35 reps, 35 snaps on defense could go out there and be a world changer, especially if Ohio State is not as concerned about a mobile Clifford. And then if Clifford gets knocked out of the game, forget about it, because they don't have a Will Levis coming off the bench like in 2019. He's at Kentucky now. They don't have that as in the backup role. So the lack of that obvious mobile quarterback, I think, will allow Ohio State to really go into going for blood mode.
Yeah, Jackson Smith-Njigba was my second guy because anytime he's dealing with the team's third best defender, that's an unfair matchup, and we'll see if that's what happens when he's lined up in the slot against Penn State.
I like the Penn State defense. I think it's a top 2 to 3 unit in the conference. If it's healthy, they're not healthy. They missed 3 interior linemen in the Illinois game. And one, as Steve pointed out, PJ Mustipher is one of the best in the conference, and he's gone for the season. But all the players that had been mentioned, Brisker in particular, are very impressive athletes. But they have other issues all over the place. And to Tony's point, setting the CJ Stroud over-under yardage for this game at 38 yards, I believe, to match Illinois' output from last week.
You got to give me 9 overtimes too.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. There's no way he's going to get to 38 in regulation. Yeah, we're anticipating some extra snaps there, but my goodness, they if you watch that game last week, especially when Illinois was on offense, because the quarterback taking the ball from under center like 70% of the time, it looked like a throwback to whatever 1985. But yeah, Illinois certainly executed the game plan to throw it like 8 times and run it 51, or maybe I'm mixing them up with Wisconsin because they did the same thing against Purdue and ran it down their throats for a 357 spot. So we shall see. On the flip side, Sean Clifford was really developing into a capable quarterback, having his best season. Now that he's gone down against Iowa, coming back with the rib issue, that looked to really bother him last week. I don't know if he's the same player. Of course, they desperately want him out there and will have him out there, it would appear, for this game, Tony. But Penn State is a very different narrative for this football team today as opposed to 2 weeks ago.
Well, I mean, they lost at Iowa by 3 points. They lose to Illinois by 2. Could have very well won that with an interception in overtime that was dropped. And so this is very close to just being a top 5 Penn State team that I think everybody knows is not a top 5 Penn State team, but they've done everything they've been asked to do. And now they're almost just falling apart because you have those two close losses, which can derail a team. It's up to the coach to keep them together. The coach might be looking at USC or LSU. Like, is he paying attention to what's going on right now? Or is he just leaving it to his assistants while he goes and does other things? And the one thing that you can't do when the head coach is looking around is assume your assistants aren't doing the exact same thing. And everybody's looking around if they think their head coach is going. And I know there are people in that department that think their head coach is going. So is it an entire coaching staff football department that is distracted right now? They sure looked distracted last week. And even with a banged up Sean Clifford, to lose to Illinois is, I mean, that's Scott Frostian right there.
Jeez.
Exactly. And so I think even if Penn State rights itself and bounces back, I don't know that Clifford is the answer right now, is healthy enough to be the answer. And it just keeps coming back to the same question. Who has enough offense right now? Not just who has the defense to slow down Ohio State, but who has enough offense to then keep up with a slowed down Ohio State offense?
I have Penn State's numbers here. I'll go quick and then let Steve jump in. But even pre-injury, listen, this Penn State passing game has not been on fire. You have to go back to the Villanova game for the last time that they've thrown over 200 yards. They threw for $199 against Indiana, $180 against Iowa. And granted, Clifford got knocked out of that game, and then $165 against Illinois. It's not. We see Clifford, we see Dotson. We immediately go back to 2020. Back shoulder throws, Jahan Dotson making all these huge plays. And we just extrapolate to that's just what happens. That's the new normal. That's the reality. That's where we live. And we're not there. I mean, he came out much stronger. Penn State came out much stronger. 247 against Wisconsin, 253 against Ball State, 302 against Auburn, 429 against Villanova. And then you have these three meh games in terms of throwing the ball. And I tend to think that Clifford, 100%, 70%, 6%, whatever the hell he is going to be a lot closer to the Illinois Sean Clifford than anything. So I'm not necessarily buying. I think it's going to be a case of Penn State having to suck it up and find a way to run, something that they've not been able to do, not only this season, but not against Ohio State.
Yeah, they didn't run the ball effectively against Villanova, which was kind of a red flag, I think. When you can't run it against an FCS team, then how do you expect to be able to run it in the Big Ten? Clifford's a competitor and all that. Penn State, to me, their only hope in this game is to muddy this thing up and hope Ohio State turns it over and try and win like a 20-17 game, because I just don't see them scoring even against Ohio State's defense, which the jury is still kind of out on them against a great offense. How are they going to play? I'm not sure they're going to get that test this week. With Clifford kind of ailing, no real discernible running game, some good receiving threats, but Illinois was able to limit what Dotson could do last week. So I don't see why Ohio State couldn't as well. Again, I think they have to hold the ball for long stretches. Like Minnesota tried to in the first game. They tried to sustain drives and milk the play clock in the first quarter. I mean, it was kind of comical watching it in real live action back then. But that's what teams need to do against Ohio State, is do anything they can to shorten the game. Because if you give C.J. Stroud and this offense multiple possessions, the odds are about 80% they're going to score. So, one way or the other, and just too many weapons, I think, for Ohio State. I just think, Penn State 4 weeks ago was a different team. Penn State 4 weeks from now could be a different team. But right now, they look like they're kind of dead in the water. And, I say that, and it's Wednesday. And, strange things can happen on Saturday. We've seen Penn State come into the Horseshoe and win games before. That 2008 game kind of sticks out like a sore thumb with Terrell Pryor was trying to do too much and fumbled the ball, and Penn State and Darrell Clark had no business even being in that game, and they won it and won the Big Ten that year. So to me, it would take some major mistakes by Ohio State, particularly on offense, probably 3 turnovers for Penn State to be in this game. And I just don't see a way where Penn State is in this thing till the end unless Dotson just somehow gets loose and puts this team, on his back, and he has 200 yards receiving. I just don't even know, how it happens. So I just think that Penn State is so limited in what they can do, and yet they're going to come in and have nothing to lose. They're going to pull out all the stops. Maybe a special teams play goes their way. Saquon Barkley, what was it, 3 or 4 years ago, returned to opening kickoff for a touchdown, and in the game, the 39-38 game. And, I said this on a couple different shows. Franklin, beat Ohio State in 2016, but it's been 4 straight losses since then, and a couple of very bitter losses for him, and then double-digit losses the last 2 years. So he is burning like anything to beat Ohio State, but he's probably got bigger problems than figuring out how to beat Ohio State right now.
I want to jump in with some rushing numbers over the last 10 years. Over the last 10 games, Penn State has had 2 guys go over 100 yards and has had 4 years where they had a guy that didn't even reach 50 yards. Devin Ford led Penn State last year with 36 rushing yards. You have to go back to 2018 when Trace McSorley ran for $172 in the 27-26 Ohio State win. And then you have to go all the way back to 2015 when Saquon Barkley went 26 for $194. But, Penn State over the last 10 years is averaging 116 yards, 116.4 per game on the ground. So if Clifford can't throw and if Penn State can't run, it just seems like it's going to be a real long day for the Knits.
And Penn State doesn't have any explosion to their running game. They have 6 rushes of 20 yards or more this season. TreVeyon Henderson has 8 by himself. TreVeyon Henderson has 6 30-yard rushes. Penn State has 3. He has 4 40-yard rushes. Penn State has 2. So, by himself, playing one half of football, he is twice as explosive as Penn State's running game. Now, Ohio State will have to tackle, and I think they will. The linebackers need to play better, I think, than they did last week. But there's just you can't just expect it to be Jahan Dotson constantly because Sean Clifford's he's not that accurate and he's not that lucky.
And, remember this, TreVeyon Henderson rushed for 277 against Tulsa. Penn State's leading rusher, Noah Cain, has rushed for, I think it's 245 over the course of the season, 7 games. So, I understand that that Kevon Lee is rushed for 230, something 220, 230. So they spread their carries around, but it's not a case of one team has bottled up this Penn State rushing offense. Everybody has bottled up the rushing offense. There's one game in note of I'm pulling up my list here. Team rush, they ran for 209 against Indiana, and then 2 games and 240 against Ball State. So if you take that off, that's 449 yards right there of a very small number. It's 50, 94, 80, 107, 62 the rest of the way. And I understand this ain't your father's Ohio State rush defense this year. So this isn't a case where you're going to say, well, Ohio State's going to hold them to 22 yards. But would you be surprised if Ohio State held them to 22 yards? I don't think I would be.
So Penn State can only run against teams from Indiana. If they make a bowl game against Notre Dame, go with the Nittany Lions.
That Penn State running back room going into 2020 was pretty deep and pretty talented with, unfortunately, Journey Brown was coming off a 200-yard Cotton Bowl effort against Memphis, but his career, unfortunately, has ended. Devin Ford, Noah Cain were top 5 recruited running backs, and Devin Ford was lost for the season early in 2020, and yeah, Noah Cain's been the guy, but have not been supported by a good offensive line. Either in pass protection or running the ball. And then on top of the lower than expected performance on the field here in recent weeks, going to Iowa again, they lose Clifford up 17-3 and blow that game against the Hawkeyes, not having a backup quarterback prepared to play in a game like that, and then blow this game inexplicably to Illinois at home. Now we've got James Franklin showing up at his news conference, and what do we make of this? To be fair, we could just pile on James Franklin for the next half hour easily.
I'm down.
And you're down for that, and it's been done on social media. But to be fair, as we all have, I get on here, and after I've talked for 5 or 6 hours, I certainly say all sorts of things come out of my mouth where I misplaced, John Harbaugh for Jim Harbaugh, and then somebody calls me an idiot because I don't know who Jim Harbaugh is. Well, obviously I do, and so forth and so on. So you can misspeak, but when it's 3 times in the course of 10 minutes, you wonder where the guy's mind is, especially when we hear that he has switched agents, Tony.
It sure seems like he's got one foot out the door. I think what I've been saying is he's almost coaching himself out of a job, and not the Penn State job, but the USC job or the LSU job, where things need to get better unless the back channels have already confirmed everything. But it is interesting, and I wonder if he'll come out and apologize or clarify some stuff. But Mark, you have a bunch of different shows, so you can misspeak. But if you just have one show where you talk about last week's opponent and this week's opponent, how often are you going to confuse the two? You probably not that often. Maybe once as a misspeak, but then to continue to like if he's thinking about Illinois, I can imagine that staying with you. But when you have Ohio State up next, you've got to leave that behind. Like you can't take Illinois even into Sunday. You've got to be worried about Ohio State, unless he's not worried about anything anymore, and he's more concerned about who's going to be his assistant staff at USC. And like I said yesterday on another show, let's see where one of the first things that we learn about in terms of coaching searches is when the rumors pop up about the coach's wife house shopping in some other city. So let's see where James Franklin's family shows up in the next week or two in terms of the housing market, and then we'll have a better idea, and maybe that will explain some of his confusion right now.
You ask where his mind is. It's in the back of a Mayflower truck to a destination unknown at this point. And I spoke to a buddy of mine who covers Penn State who's like, oh, well, James, has been known to kind of misspeak like that before. I'm like, He's like, I know. It sounded good to me too. So, yeah, I don't know if his mind is where it needed to be at that point, but I'm also sure that like most coaches, he just does not really give a flying you-know-what about talking to the media. So, his mind could have been lost in the playbook or trying to figure out this or trying to figure out that, but it certainly is a bad look and, certainly gives guys like us something to talk about because, again, doubling down twice and saying playing Illinois and playing in the big house or what? I mean, that's just a mess, man. That's just a mess and not necessarily a good look for a coach that, through his career, certainly done a good job of recruiting, but I think a lot of people have kind of questioned some late game calls, and this kind of plays right into it about his attention to detail.
And the very best in the business do understand the big picture and the treetop CEO role, but they do pay attention to the details too. That's what makes the great ones great, is they can do both or get the right people in place to take care of both. Steve, you got to have some thoughts on James Franklin's faux pas here from yesterday.
Yeah, I'm not sure what he was thinking or what was going through his mind as he was speaking yesterday, just a little disheveled. And, I go back to Saturday, just a weird, goofy, crazy game. And we're driving, seemed like it took all day. It should take about 4 hours to get from Columbus to Bloomington.
Oh, no.
We left Columbus at 10:45, and I think we pulled in to the stadium lot about 4:45, so that was 6 hours. Now, we did stop at Buffalo Wild Wings near Dayton for about 45 minutes and got some food about 12 o'clock, and we watched the first quarter of all the different games on TV, and then we got back on the road. So it was an extra hour and 15 minutes of travel time, basically, because of the two construction problems we ran into. And so we're listening on Sirius, and we're kind of going between that game and the Michigan game, the Cincinnati game, and the Oklahoma game. So we had 4 games we were trying to monitor. And so we eventually end up on the Illinois game. And it was just curious that Penn State needed one play to put the game away like 10 different times and couldn't make it. And you just wonder, like, what's going on there? Because Illinois, I mean, they've had a terrible year. I mean, they lost to Texas San Antonio. I know they're still undefeated. I don't know. How do you lose at home to Illinois? I mean, when you're Penn State and again, the injury to the quarterback changed their season, and it's been unfortunate. And so, they're not going to get there this year. And I think that, they have 2 losses in the Big Ten. They have about a 1% chance of winning the Big Ten. They have to win out, which is not going to happen. And they have to hope that Penn State, Michigan, and Michigan State also lose another game on top of that. So they somehow get into a tie with 2 losses and win the tiebreaker because they beat them all. So I don't know. It's not going to happen. It certainly isn't going to happen. And, more likely it's looking like a 7-5 type season for them. And is this a case where Penn State just says at the end of the year, go ahead and pursue whatever you want, we'll let you out of your contract, go type thing. And they just part, as friends and let it go at that. But he's got a great setup at Penn State. They've recruited very well. They just don't have, they're always a player or two short of taking it that next level. And he did win they beat Memphis in the Cotton Bowl there a few years ago. So he did get a New Year's Six win in there somewhere, which is a small feather that you put in your hat. He did win one Big Ten championship and
Fiesta Bowl.
Yeah.
Against Washington.
They beat Penn State or beat Washington in the Fiesta Bowl. So he's got 2. That's good. Whatever. He put that program back on solid ground after the Paterno thing, and Bill O'Brien didn't really work out very well. So, whoever he hands it off to would be in really good shape, I think, if he decides to leave. I am just not of a mind that he leaves. I just think that, there's something to be said for comfortability. He's 8 years in there. He could probably do another 8 years standing on his head, there. So, and then retire probably. So, I don't know what he aspires to be. Is that shiny object in Los Angeles all that shiny? I don't know. LSU has won 3 national championships in the last 17, 18 years with 3 different head coaches. You can get there from here, but you're only going to beat Alabama about once every 4 years. So that when you do, you got to make that one count. So as Joe Burrow did. So I don't know. The grass seems like it's always greener on the other side, but I'm not so sure in this case. I think he's got a good thing going there at Penn State. If they'll overlook what's happened this year, and he can explain it away with the quarterback injury. And then the transfer portal. So I think he stays, to be honest with you.
I think it'd be easier to win at USC than deal with Ohio State, though. And I wonder how much that bothers him, like that roadblock that is there. And you can continue to do what you're doing at Penn State. Is he happy with that? How long does Penn State kind of get tired of that, especially if there's a 7-win season mixed in there or something? So I think it'll be interesting to see what he wants. And because you're not going to beat Ohio State, you said it's like LSU and Alabama, you beat them once every 4 years. If you beat Ohio State once every 4 years, then you better be ready to then capitalize on that. James Franklin did it, and Ohio State still went to the playoffs. So even when he beats Ohio State, he can't capitalize on it. So, I just wonder if Ohio State has worn him out there.
Yeah, and I'll say that he had his little speech about being an elite team or whatever, and he kind of painted himself into a bit of a corner because they haven't become elite. If anything, they've kind of regressed. So, and I'm not saying that he's on a pitch count at Penn State and that he needs to be looking over his shoulder, but he could go somewhere else and start the clock over and try to rebuild. I mean, there certainly is some talent on the Penn State roster, but I certainly see some deficiencies as well. And you go somewhere like California, if you go to SC and you're recruiting against Oregon, and Oregon, hell, Mario Cristobal could end up at LSU. So you could have a pretty good power vacuum out there to where you step in and become somebody who is able to not have to recruit head-to-head against Ohio State as often and be able to get all these kids that are west of the Rockies. And I'm not saying you move just to move, but maybe you have gotten to the point of where you've just hit your head against that wall so many times that it's like, well, maybe it's time to move on. I've heard stories that there's certainly some frustration with James toward the administration and the administration toward James. And, I don't know how much I buy this one, that one, or another one. But, if I've heard the stories, I'm sure other people have heard the stories too. So there is something to be said about a fresh start.
It's a lot of upheaval when you change coaches because you got to basically hire 40 new people to help run the program. And it's just a mess. And I don't know. I guess happy with where you are, or, if I was really serious about USC, you have to get a long-term contract for a lot of money because they what have they fired 3 coaches at midseason in the last 10 or 11 years? I mean, what was it? Kiffin, Sarkisian. Now Sarkisian was for cause, obviously, because he was a disaster. But and then Helton. You know, I don't know. It just they don't seem to want to stick with anybody longer than about 2.5 years. And although Helton probably lasted about 4 or 5, as I think about it, but I don't know. It's like guys go there and wear out their welcome, and you know, lose games to other mediocre Pac-12 teams, and they fire them. So I don't know. To me, it just doesn't seem like it's that great of a job. And
I was just going to say, do you want to go in, though, already planning your escape plan? I mean, I know we all joke, all guys joke, oh, make sure you sign a prenup or whatever, but this sounds like a coaching prenup that you're already planning what happens if you bomb out. I mean, these guys have tremendous egos. Well, that happened to those guys, but I'm going to turn this what around. So
yeah,
I understand. I agree 1,000%. It is a pain in the blank to have to sit there and who is going to be my associate to my associate director of football operations, and you can only bring so many people with you, and there's a lot to it. But
you got to have 5 people to inflate the balls, 5 people to polish the footballs, 5 people to bag up the footballs. You know, you got to have 5 people for every job at these major. I mean, you can't spend $200 million by accident. I mean, it's got to be willfully done.
If there's somebody I think that would do well dealing with Snoop Dogg and Will Ferrell dropping by practice, I think it's James Franklin. Everybody's like, well, Urban Meyer, prior to Jacksonville and blah 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 blah. Urban Meyer would blow a gasket if somebody came in and Will Ferrell showed up dressed in uniform, runs out there to try and take a play. Urban would probably take his head off. But I think James Franklin, just his personality and his demeanor, I mean, I think that he's somebody who fits the SEC, the USC job better than most.
Yeah. I also think the LSU job is interesting, not just because you can win there, but because Nick Saban's not going to be at Alabama much longer. And that makes the LSU job even better because you'll no longer have to worry about him, and whoever steps into that job will have their own kind of situation at Alabama.
James Franklin has basically succeeded at the same level that Joe Paterno succeeded his final 5 or 6 years. If you look at Joe Paterno's final 5-6 years, it roughly mirrors what James Franklin's doing. He's fielding top 10 to 15 teams in the country, but he's not able to get over the hump and get to the Big Ten championship game other than the 2016 situation. But now it's been what's going on 5 consecutive years of being clearly the second best team in the division, if not the conference, and with the second best athletes, that has given Ohio State the most difficult time consistently. But and if they're okay with that, that's what they're going to be. Go 9-3, 10-2 most seasons, and get to a decent bowl game. But I also don't know that we should be giving James Franklin a ton of credit for stabilizing the program. To me, that goes to Bill O'Brien. Because for them to go 8-4, 7-5 after that situation, I thought was a minor miracle. And then James Franklin came in and took it from there. All right, Penn State, Ohio State, of course, night game coming up. Still a huge one for the Buckeyes and the Nittany Lions, but not quite as big as we had anticipated. Just to clean up a few things that were thrown out there in the live chat. Whoever wants to pick these up. Rumors circulating concerning Quinn Ewers and his future based on social media accounts and.
Well, I'll jump in on this one because I saw that and I just wanted to say, he still has Ohio State in his Twitter account. What you also have to realize is these are now social media accounts are now billboards for the players. And if you're not paying them to be on part of that billboard, don't be surprised if you're removed. So if Ohio State is not giving them money to put on their social media accounts and their bios or whatever, then maybe they're being advised, hey, that's valuable space. Don't just give that away. And also, if Quinn Ewers is even thinking about transferring right now, then he's never going he was never going to play at Ohio State anyway, because he knew coming in this year he was not going to play. And he knows Ryan Day has been talking to him through this whole time about not playing. And he didn't travel last to the last road game because there's no need for him. And it was going to be a more competitive event than the previous road game. That's why I think he traveled to Rutgers. There's just no need for him at Indiana. And Ryan Day has been asked, hey, is he ready to play? Ryan Day has said no. And I think people they're looking for reasons to chase the quarterbacks out of here. Let them leave first. I know Ohio State is still looking for a 2022 guy. And so they know, Ohio State knows the situation as well. But I don't think Quinn Ewers is the issue at this point. He's got his head down. He's trying to do what he can to contend for the starting job maybe next year. And if not next year, then the year after when CJ Stroud goes and is a first-round draft pick after his redshirt sophomore season. So I think people are just – I don't think there's anything to the Quinn Ewers thing. I haven't heard anything. Maybe there is, but I just think at this point nothing has gone outside of the plan. So why would that now suddenly chase him away this year?
I mean, it's like any other position at Ohio State. Somebody goes off and has a big year and people are excited, but it's like, but why isn't Master Teague playing more? Why isn't Julian Fleming playing more? What do you want? Do you want to sit there and have the guy that's going to be the hot hand and do X, Y, and Z? Or is this, are we just trying to split things up? And I understand everybody is very worried about the transfer portal and what this means. And honestly, if a program goes through a horrible transfer portal year, yeah, it's going to be significant. I mean, we've seen teams do that already. We saw a lot of guys leave Penn State. I mean, it happens, but Ohio State is winning, is developing guys. And as Tony said, with some of these guys, some of the guys that are transferring, it's because that they know they see what their hand is, and they're sitting there with 2-7, and they know that they're not going to be able to win the hand, so they're going to leave. But I think that the concern over Quinn Ewers is unfounded at this point. A lot of Twitter sleuthing, and while I'm not opposed to that, I don't think that it's not being framed properly. And I agree with what Tony said.
Yeah, I'm going to punt on the Quinn Ewers thing. I have seen no indication that he's soured on Ohio State. I did feel it was a little bit curious that he didn't go to Indiana. But I think that they may have just figured that it was not going to be a competitive game, and that spot could go to somebody who was actually going to get to play, maybe run down on a punt or play 5 plays on offense at the end of the game, or, the 73rd guy or 74th guy, whatever the number is that they take. And for somebody else, it became, an important experience to go on that trip and travel and be a part of it. Typically, they like the scholarship quarterbacks to go to get an idea of what it takes to travel, to have the meetings at the hotel, the walk through in the morning, and traveling over to the stadium and getting ready and warming up and everything that you go through to prepare for a road game and playing in a road. That way, the first time these guys, if Stroud had never traveled, last year, just as an example, and obviously he was the backup, but Jack Miller, if they'd not traveled last year, then they would have never known what Minnesota was going to be like when they walked in there. Of course, there were no crowds last year, so that's a bad example. But you understand what I'm saying is that they take all the quarterbacks, even though they're redshirting. I mean, it is a little bit curious, and maybe Ryan Day will be asked about it tomorrow. But I don't see where Ewers gains anything. I think he gets developed, although is he going to play next year? That's the thing. If Stroud is this good and continues to play this good against Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State, Iowa, Cincinnati, and Georgia, just as a throw out of who they could play, then he's the guy. I mean, if they go all the way with this guy, then he's their guy. So I don't know how you replace him with somebody else unless he's, not physically up to it, because he's done some things so far against, these teams that, are hard to do against air, in my opinion. So I want to see how he does when he's swimming in the deeper end of the pool. But, again, it's going to be what it's going to be. And I know, Kevin, you've said you think Miller may have one step out. I think Miller's the lifer. I think Miller's the guy who's there and gets the standing ovation 4 years from now on Senior Day for sticking it out. And maybe a few starts along the way somewhere. I think the other two guys are maybe in peril of heading somewhere else, but
Don't put that evil on me, Ricky Bobby. I didn't say I have never put a name on there. You can't unring a bell. You sit there and say somebody's transferring. That's on your permanent record. I've never said anything like that.
Maybe it wasn't you. It was somebody else that said they thought Miller was maybe, I don't know. Somebody else said they thought Miller was one step out. And I'm like, no, I think he loves it at Ohio State. So I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. I love to be told what I apparently said 6 weeks ago, because following CJ Stroud's, depending on your perspective, rough start at Ohio State, one particular person was adamant that you had to be an elite quarterback to play at Ohio State. And if you're not elite, you cannot play at Ohio State. And I said, well, we've seen very little of CJ Stroud. If he turns into an elite quarterback, I'm not going to be surprised. But if he's a top 15 quarterback in the country, Ohio State can easily win the Big Ten. But he was adamant, no, that's not good enough. Top 10, 15 in the nation's not good enough at quarterback for Ohio State. You have to be elite. You have to be a Heisman finalist. And so then I don't hear from the guy as CJ Stroud improves and so forth until the other day. He calls in and says, I told you, and this guy was adamant about CJ Stroud needs to be benched immediately. He doesn't have, in addition to the numbers, he's not showing the leadership skills, the confidence. You can see the way he's looking down, reading all the body language. He's never going to be a leader. He just doesn't have it in him. Calls me the other day and says, I told you, see, I was right. You were wrong. CJ Stroud was going to be an elite quarterback. I told you. I said, okay. All right. Ohio State, Penn State, Saturday night. Such a big game that here at the Voice of College Football, simulcasting on 3 channels, the Big Ten channel, the Ohio State channel, and the Penn State channel. And we've got a nice little contribution coming in from Treasure the Torah. We appreciate that so much. What's up, fellas? Long time to no see. Just showing the page some love, peace, and much respect. Appreciate that so much. Thank you for that.
I just want to jump in here.
Yeah.
Ohio State football is back on Quinn Ewers' Twitter profile. So let's put that one to rest. It's back on there. Maybe Ohio State figured something out, but it's back.
There you go.
Our long national nightmare is over.
You beat me to it.
That line never gets old. All right.
Well, that and Bino Cook saying about the Iranian hostages getting lifetime passes to Major League Baseball. Oh, haven't those people suffered enough?
which I took great offense to at the time. Oh my goodness. To hear that in 1980 as a 11-year-old, I was steaming mad for weeks over that. Kevin, I'll hit you up on this one. Any idea on the next commit for the Buckeyes, or who could be simmering out there ready to pull the trigger?
No.
Okay.
I have a thought.
All right, Steve.
This came up in my chat, and I deferred to our guru, as our friend Tim May would say. He's a guru. Bill Kurlick, recruiting analyst extraordinaire. I said, after this weekend, do you see anybody committing? Because it is a big recruiting weekend. And he didn't mention any 2022 players that he thought were really close, but he thought maybe Joshua Padilla from Beaver Heights Wayne, offensive lineman, 2023, that he could be leaning a little bit toward Ohio State, which is interesting because his teammate Emil Wagner, who's 2022, has had an offer but has not made any kind of movement toward maybe even looking that Ohio State was, one of his top choices, or I mean, it's probably not the right thing to say, but doesn't seem like he's anywhere close to making a commitment. So I don't know. Who knows?
Keep an eye on 23 wide receiver Carnell Tate as well, who's been added to the list. That one, I think that was supposed to be coming down to like a December announcement, but his coming back to Columbus could be a good indication. I mean, it still could be something that he sits on because he'd only have to wait about five weeks or so, but that's somebody that I would probably have on my short list too.
At this point next week, let's say the Buckeyes go out there and take care of business, 18.5-point favorites. So let's say they do what's expected. They win a 35-17 game. The college football playoff rankings, the initial offering will be served up at that point. Steve, what do you expect to see? What are going to be some clues for you to determine what the committee is, what they're valuing this year, or at least this week?
I think this year, more than any other year, the pollsters have been swayed by what has happened in the last 12 hours. They make their poll votes on Saturday night. And this year, more than any year that I can recall, they have taken an outrageous result from Saturday and let it completely capture their thinking. And they've been prisoners of the moment more than voters who should be looking at an entire team's body of work. And whether that's going to carry over to the committee or not, I'm not sure. I would hope that they're going to take every team's body of work and consider it. I think Ohio State has an okay body of work, but certainly the schedule is backloaded with so many more tough challenges here down the stretch. And one area where Ohio State's made tremendous improvement is obviously on defense. They're all the way up to 18th nationally in scoring defense, where they were, down the 70s, 80s, 90s at one point in some of these defensive categories. They have made a complete 180 on defense, at least in terms of their rankings. Some of that's a function of the awful, terrible teams that they've been playing here the last several weeks. But at any rate, if I had to pinpoint it, I'm going to say Georgia number one if they beat Florida. Florida's unranked, kind of the same situation as Penn State. I mean, Penn State's ranked in the 20s, but Florida, really has nothing to lose, and Mullen could be coaching for his job. And, do they somehow, some way score 20 points and eke out a win? I don't know. I don't think that's possible against Georgia's defense, but just kind of throw that out there. But I think Georgia won. I think they're going to go Alabama 2 just because it's Alabama. I think they're going to go Oklahoma 3 if they're still undefeated. And then Michigan, if they beat Michigan State, maybe they jump Michigan to 4, drop Cincinnati clear down to 5 because they don't want a group of 5 in their top 4. They don't want to set a precedent. And, honestly, this stretch for Cincinnati, Navy, I want to say Tulane and South Florida each have 1 win. So these games are really going to drag Cincinnati down, particularly when they play like dog crap last week against Navy. I mean, they won the game. They were up 2 touchdowns and gave up a touchdown in the final minute, so they win by 1 touchdown. But, had they not recovered the onside kick, it would have been interesting. But
they actually didn't recover.
Yeah, you're right. Navy got it. Yeah.
Navy threw a pick with 45 seconds left.
Yeah.
They were on the ropes a little bit if Navy can actually complete a forward pass.
I think the committee, if Cincinnati's in the top 4, they'd be 4, I think. But, and that may just be a bone that they throw them until they pull them out in a week to be determined sometime down the line. And then Ohio State 6th. I think that's how it could be. I think if Michigan swamps Michigan State, they're gonna really love that, because that's an unbeaten beating an unbeaten, and they're gonna reward that. And then from there, there'll be adjustments made as they go. But I think Ohio State fans should be prepared that Michigan or Michigan State, whoever wins that game, is probably going to leap over them unless Ohio State just completely dismantles Penn State, and then, which is not out of the realm of possibility, given how terrible Penn State's played the last game and a half. That's not out of the realm of possibility. But that's my thought, is that it's the SEC Invitational, and and everybody else is just hoping for an invitation.
Oh,
Hey, Kevin, if I could just jump in just to get this message off your face and address it real quick. The difference when there's a head-to-head that's legit, Oregon with an argument against Ohio State, they've got the same record. Texas A&M's lost 2 games. Alabama's lost 1 game. That's why your argument doesn't make sense. All right, go ahead, Kevin.
Until we see what this committee values, because it changes from year to year and week to week, my handicapping it is very difficult. I have a major problem with putting Alabama at 2, and I know Steve is projecting what he thinks they're going to do, not what he's going to do. So let me let me preface it by saying
Yeah, I
that.
have Ohio State ahead of Alabama, actually, but that's just me.
But so Alabama's loss is a good loss, and Ohio State's loss is not quite as good of a loss. And I understand that Ohio State's schedule is backloaded somewhat. And, by the time we get to the end, Ohio State will have the chance to play several teams that are ranked. Whether or not they'll be ranked in the final tabulations remains to be seen on what happens there. I do think Ohio State is going to pants Penn State in a big way. I don't think this game's going to be close. I think that the committee is going to start Cincinnati even lower to give itself room, because if Cincinnati keeps winning, it's going to be very difficult to explain away how they're moving down at the end, even though that the AAC just does not have the horses in it. That schedule is not great. And the 2 wins that Cincinnati is propping itself up on, Indiana is proving to be nothing. And I'm not convinced Notre Dame doesn't lose another one. I want to see what they do with Oklahoma, because Oklahoma keeps winning barely. They can't even necessarily come out and be like, oh, it's a historic offense. No, it's a historic offense is Ohio State this year. So Oklahoma's doing enough to win on offense, barely enough to win on defense. And I think that their number is going to come up probably by bedlam, but that has nothing to do with week 1 of these rankings. But I think we see Ohio State not in the top 4 for sure in these first rankings. Probably 6, as Steve said, but 5 wouldn't surprise me. Again, I think it just depends on what they value. And if these are, the best and brightest minds that football has to offer, I think they have to recognize that the Pac-12 isn't much better than the American in terms of level of competition.
I think what we will see is, I agree, I've been saying this for a long time, that the committee is going to gradually move Cincinnati down. We'll see where they start out. And I don't think you can go ahead and just give it to Alabama at 2. I think what they'll do is go Oklahoma 2. And, if they remain undefeated, that's great. I think then maybe Alabama 3, Cincinnati 4. And then the winner of Michigan State will be 5. Ohio State will be 6. And maybe Ohio State is 7 behind Oregon. But I think the committee wants to establish that they like Ohio State more than Oregon, because that's going to be something that comes back and comes around for much of the rest of this outcome. And then really, if you have Michigan and Michigan State ahead of Ohio State, it doesn't matter. That will get settled one way or the other. I think at least by putting Michigan and Michigan State ahead of Ohio State, you're giving credit and you're valuing their undefeated record. But then if Ohio State is ahead of those teams, then that also shows you that they really value the eye test, and that eye test is not going to go well for Oregon when it comes to being compared to Ohio State. And the further those 2 teams get from each other, they won't be compared. And really, that's what Ohio State wants. They just want to be separated as much as possible from Oregon, so that that head-to-head never really comes into play. But I'm going to say Georgia, Oklahoma, Alabama, Cincinnati, and then Michigan or Michigan State right there, and then Ohio State behind them. And it's always, I don't want to say comical. It can be funny. It can be frustrating, because every week after they release the polls, we get on the teleconference with them, and they use
Speak
whatever
out of both sides of their mouth.
Exactly. And that's why I'm wondering what is their established narrative the first week? How quickly do they go away from that? And it's almost like they've got a story that they want to get to, but they don't know the plot points and the good form of storytelling to get there. And so from just each week to each week, it's like, well, no, this character does this now, and this is what we like about it, and this is why they're going to do it. And then next week, that character does totally something out of character, and it's like, well, but that's also what we think. And it's really a mess, and it's entertainment, but it's also like, but last week, 2 weeks ago, you said this, and now you're saying this, and it's like, well, more information has come in, and this committee member like this, and
you've been on one too many teleconferences, Tony.
Many too many, in fact.
Well, ESPN has a contract with the American. I don't think it's real lucrative, but they were shamed into putting Cincinnati against Central Florida in prime time on ABC about 2 years ago because they had no other good game that week, and it was a matchup of like top 15 teams or something at the time. So it made sense. But I guarantee you that the two themes from our friend Reese Davis will, if I know that they're playing 3-1 loss teams down the stretch, certainly Reese Davis will know, and somebody, a producer in his ear, will tell him, crap on Cincinnati, they want no part of Cincinnati and its 44,000 TV homes. They want no part of that. Trust me, for the playoff. They want zero. They don't want even part of it for the New Year's Six, let alone, but they have to grudgingly take one of the group of 5 champions. But they certainly do not, when they're paying, XXX $1 million for that playoff, and they don't want to lose any money having Cincinnati in one of those games. So to me, he's going to come down hard on Cincinnati, trust me. And he's going to come down hard on Ohio State. For some reason, they love to crap on Ohio State. And, the loss to Oregon, is going to come up and haven't played anybody. Penn State's quarterback was hurt. Indiana's quarterback was hurt, so on and so forth. They got to beat somebody. You're going to hear that from Dez and Pollock and, the gang. So it's going to be a fun week, I think.
Steve, you mentioned the Cincinnati market. Don't forget about that Dayton market too. That helps.
Yeah.
What if they promised to turn the game on at all the La Rosa's locations? Would that help the TV numbers?
There's like 50 of those, so that's another 50 TV homes. So
right.
Yeah.
And
the Gold Star houses
and Montgomery Inn. We could boost this number up to 40,107 if we really work at it.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Congratulations to Cincinnati. They are doing something that is outstanding. And we saw Kelly did it 10, 11 years ago. And, same thing. He was undefeated. But congratulations to them. They are off on a great run. Hopefully they can get to 13-0 and really have some people squirming. I think that'd be a lot of fun because it'd be great for Ohio football.
I would also like to see ESPN have to get familiar with the market size of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, because if Wake Forest can run the table, you talk about a nightmare scenario if they've got to put in Cincinnati and Wake Forest, if they could somehow make it through.
Wake Forest ain't going no blah, blah, college
they're
football.
13-0?
Nope, they ain't going.
They're going if they're 13-0.
We heard years ago, Lawrence Maroney told the columnist from the Minnesota
they're going.
paper, and he was driving around St. Louis. He said, Lawrence, what if you took Minnesota to the Rose Bowl? And Lawrence Maroney, the star running back, looked at him and said, Minnesota ain't going no bleep, bleep Rose Bowl. Wake Forest ain't going no bleep, bleep college football playoff. Sorry.
Wake Forest is not going to go because they're not good enough, so they're not going to win the games. But if they somehow miraculously win the games, they're going to beat 5. They're going to play 5 ranked teams at the conclusion of their season. They are going to the college football playoff if they're 13-0 in the ACC champ.
I demand an investigation on this ranking because the ACC is trash. The AC is trash. Wake Forest defense is trash. The Wake Forest defense makes Oklahoma's defense look like the 85 Bears.
I understand all that, but Wake
Pittsburgh.
Forest's ACC schedule is like 10 times better than Cincinnati's American Conference schedule.
Well,
not even
off
close.
with both of their heads. But do not give credit to that garbage football that we're seeing out of the ACC this year. It's terrible.
If they go undefeated, they've got to be in. Otherwise, why are you playing football?
I don't know why they're playing football. Because they can't smoke cigarettes? I don't know. No. Hell no.
Oh, Wake Forest, 13-0. They will be my team.
Don't care. Don't care.
Who would be their best 3 wins under that scenario?
NC State, whoever wins the Coastal, Pitt, NC State, Clemson.
Okay.
You delivered Clemson with a straight face?
Yeah, well, I gave it a Clemson.
They're going to be end up 8-4, 7-5.
It sounds good, Clemson. That's why I went with that one. Sounds good. Louisville, Florida State, Syracuse. Hey,
the way they're playing right now, they can beat anybody in the ACC.
Yeah.
But I could also say the same thing about Bowling Green.
Everybody can beat anybody in the ACC. Yes, it's a mess. But it's fun. I like the fun mess rather than Clemson beats everyone and they're already in. I don't like that.
Exactly. We could complain, but who really thought that, gosh, I can't wait to see Wake Forest against Pitt in the ACC championship game this year. I mean, that's going to be entertaining.
It will be more so than seeing Clemson beat somebody by 5 touchdowns. Absolutely, it will, even if neither one of them is going to make the playoff and they're both 9-3. Yeah, it's a decent game. The last thing I will say, and then you guys can say whatever you want as we sign off, is that since we're at the outset of this anticipated Big Ten East bloodbath between these 4 teams, I will say that I'll go on record as saying Ohio State's going to separate itself, and it's not going to be a bloodbath. And they may have one serious, competitive, like down to the wire, got to make a drive in the last 5 minutes game amongst Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State, Purdue. But otherwise, they're going to win these games by 10 to 14 points, and they're going to win the division and be the team clearly.
I'd agree with that. I think that kind of fits with what we've seen out of Ohio State to play, I would say perfect football, to play outstanding football the last 3 weeks, and really show no signs of not carrying that over. I mean, it's not really – there have been very few areas where you'd say, oh, that's an issue, the last 3 games. Now, obviously, it's going to be much tougher. And Penn State's going to provide some challenges, even if they're not 100%. So, I think it's going to be a fun game Saturday night, one way or the other. And can Penn State hold up against the onslaught of Ohio State's playmakers? Can Michigan or Michigan State hold up? We're going to find out. So, as you said, so much to be determined here down the stretch.
We all good?
I don't think any of these games are going to be close. I mean, and I know we never predict, you never see you never see it coming. You don't see it coming. Ohio State, Oregon at the beginning of the season. How many times does Oregon win that out of 10? Who cares? They won it. That game is there. It happened. So whether or not you believe it's 1 out of 10, 4 out of 10, whatever, they won the game. So, you can't explain that away, but I'll have a better feeling after we see Michigan State play. Does somebody come out way ahead in that game? Then that becomes the team that becomes the de facto challenge for Ohio State. I'm not convinced of anything coming out of the West. I mean, after watching Spencer Petras for a couple of weeks, I'm not convinced that he can necessarily lead Iowa in a big game situation. I mean, who's in the who's in the Alert 5 in the West? Minnesota? I mean, I don't know. I don't know on that point. So, I don't think that Ohio State's necessarily going to be going out there cracking skulls by 40 points a game throughout the rest of the season, but I do think Ohio State's going to be cracking skulls by 40 points against Penn State.
The thing for me is Ohio State has played one ranked team this season and lost. So how good are they? That is still to be determined. But they look good enough to me to beat all of the teams on their schedule by 3 to 4 touchdowns any given week. Now, I'm not saying they're going to do that. They're good enough to beat every team on their schedule by 28 points. And it wouldn't surprise me to see them beat any of the teams on the schedule by 28 points. I will agree with what Jeremy Ruckert said this week, and that basically the only team that can slow down Ohio State's offense is Ohio State. And that's by making mistakes in blocking and assignments and not reading the holes and not catching the ball. It's up to Ohio State to slow down Ohio State, because they can do whatever they want. They have so many different weapons that no defense is really set to stop them in the Big Ten. And so, I think they're going to – I don't know if there's going to be a close game. You assume there will be. I don't know who it's going to be, though.
Tony, where can we find you?
You can find me at Buckeye Scoop. You can find me on Twitter at Tony Gerdeman, and you can check out my podcast with Tom Orr, sometimes Kevin Orr, at Buckeye Weekly. You can find that on all of your podcast platforms.
Everybody,
I'm not Kevin Orr. No.
Did I say?
Way to go, James Franklin.
I'm just worried about Illinois, guys.
I guess I'll jump in next.
You might as well go and clearly state your name and spell it out, please.
I'm Kevin Noon, and I too am at Buckeye Scoop. I'm generally not on the morning scoop. I'm on the Big Me Kickoff podcast. You can find me at Twitter at Kevin_Noon, and be sure to join me on Thursday over at Buckeye Scoop as I roll out 4,000 words. Some of them even make sense for my tail of the tape on Penn State, and explain all the reasons why this will not be a close game.
Steve.
Bucknuts.com is where I'll be on Twitter at Steve Hellwagon. And we're going to have all kinds of coverage leading up to the Penn State game as well on our site. And, looking forward to it. Ohio State's going to wear all scarlet uniforms, and they're going to scarlet out the shoe. First time that I could find in at least 6 decades they've worn scarlet pants. So if they ever did wear them, I don't know if they ever did or not. So I saw an artist rendering of Vic Janowitz in an all scarlet uniform, and I don't know if there's any color photographs that exist from the 40s, but that's what we know. So tune in on Saturday night. As somebody joked, when you play like Rutgers, you should look like Rutgers. So there you go.
Where are those uniforms against MAC schools? I don't like to see those in traditional games, Big Ten game. I don't just.
Well, they've worn black jerseys and gray
I know.
jerseys against Penn State at home in the past. So yeah, it's crazy.
Get off my lawn.
Yeah, I'm an old guy. I want the standard uniform. I want to be able to think I'm in 1985 when I see Ohio State and Penn State or any traditional team play.
Mark, what about red unis, red pants, but neck rolls? Everybody has to wear neck rolls and big shoulder
That makes
pads.
up for it.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think everyone's Chris Spielman or Eric Kumaro or somebody I'm missing that would wear.
No Nikes, just red ponies.
Break out those Russell Athletic jerseys.
Champion.
Everyone out there, these guys give us, when it is all added up, a couple hours of insight, knowledge, everything else every week. So we appreciate those that contributed. Venmo, PayPal, Cash App. You can look me up at Mark Rogers TV. Put Ohio State on the notation. So I would encourage everyone to consider that here at the Voice of College Football. We'll be back next Wednesday. Hit the bell for the notifications. That way you know when we're going live, when we got to switch up the schedule. Otherwise, everybody enjoy Ohio State and Penn State on Saturday night. And guys, we always appreciate it.
Take care.
Absolutely.